Diamonds. I am told that diamonds are but pieces of black carbon which have experienced severe pressure and intense heat. But the torture has turned them into stones of beauty and wealth. This is very similar to the story of my life. Who am I? Just call me Black Diamond. I live in Sierra Leone, West Africa, where these diamonds were dug from the streams and valleys that ribbon my beloved bush country. My story starts as a piece of carbon, for I too was black, tortured, and unattractive. But I was delivered from Satan's hand, from starvation, and from the cruelties of superstition by the Christ, of whom missionaries preach. This, then, is my story. We will have to take the mission jeep and go up country, leaving the city far behind. Our little village was just a ring of little grass-roofed houses. The motor roads are but spears of the white man's civilization, which have penetrated the elephant grass plains and bush of my country. But to reach my village, you must leave the road and trek through the elephant grass to a small village of not more than a dozen huts. In this village, my family had lived for many years. I had never traveled more than a few miles from it. Life in such a village was very simple, but here centered all the joys and sorrows and hopes of our lives. It was here that I sat in torture day after day, fanning the flies from my sores, which were covered with leaves and bush medicines. The witch doctor had done what he could to help me, but I only grew worse. The sores on my legs had eaten away the flesh until the bone was exposed. There was no way to get away from the agony that was with me day and night. The only thing that seemed to break the monotony was watching the thousands of rice birds who feverishly built their nests in the nearby trees. For endless hours, I watched them as they prepared their homes and brought food to their young ones. One day, the head man of the village came and examined my sores. I was afraid of this, for I knew what had happened to others who had been sick. He told me I was cursed by an evil spirit and would bring harm to his village if allowed to remain. I longed to tell him that I was not cursed, nor did I have a devil, but I was only a sick little boy. I could not cry out to this elder, who was the head man of our village. Then he called the old men of the village together, and my parents were sent for. The medicine man must be called. He would know what should be done. He carefully studied his stones and talked to his charms, and finally told the people that I was cursed. I would bring a great harm if I were not removed from the village. My parents' fear was greater than their love for me, so they dared not refuse to obey. I was told I must leave the village. There were missionaries in the village of Kamakwi, 3 miles away, where some of our people had gone for help. With only a loincloth and a piece of bark, I inched my way through the bush until I came to the mission house at Kamakwi. Fear gripped my heart when the white missionary came toward me. Birch wanted to know where I had come from. She spoke to me in my native tongue, bent over me, and tenderly dressed my wounds. Because I could not return to my own village, I asked the missionary to allow me to stay, promising to work when I grew stronger. The kindness of the missionary gave me hope. As I began to feel better, I was allowed to do errands, cut wood, and carry water. Later, when I was much improved, Birch took me into the mission to help with the work. One of the greatest days of my life came when I was allowed to attend day school. I could hardly imagine that this was happening to me, for even the sons of the chief of my own village had not gone to school. The big difference between my people and the missionaries was not the contrast of clothing or food or of the many things they had that we did not have, but rather the fact that they seemed really happy and free of fear. Whether they sat down to eat or met in a council meeting, they thanked their God and prayed. As they prayed, they talked to God like a friend. I learned much more about the secret of their happiness when I accompanied Pa Birch and some of the other boys on trek. In village after village, he would explain to my people about his God and the gift of Christ to the world. When he prayed, he talked to God about us, about me, and about the other boys on trek with us. Often, as we sat around the fire at night, he would tell us about God and God's Son, Jesus Christ, who was sent into the world as a sacrifice for our sins. I listened as he preached to my people of the Jesus way. We worshiped gods that had no life, who did nothing for us, gods who brought fear to our lives. But this Jesus loved us, and this same love in the heart of the missionary prompted him to bring help and good counsel to my people. If any doubt about the genuineness of the Jesus way remained in my heart, it vanished as I watched Birch dress the sores and care for the sick in the villages. She was so loving and gentle. I thought that this must be a wonderful way to live. One day, Pa Birch talked about the Jesus way and what wonderful things he did when people believed. I asked if Jesus would do that for me. He explained how I should pray and ask Jesus to take away my sins and come into my heart. Then his Jesus became mine. That day, life took on a new meaning for me. Life continued, and even my schoolwork took on a new meaning. I began to have a purpose for learning beyond the simple joy of being able to read and write. And in due time, I graduated from day school and Bible school. This Jesus had filled my heart with love for my own people, and I wanted to help them. Not long before Bible school graduation, I was invited to go to the graduation exercises at the girls' school at Camabai. By this time, I was beginning to think about marriage and to look about for a wife. As I looked at the graduating class, there was one girl named Kindu who stood out to me above the rest. I arranged to talk to her many times, and finally we decided to marry. The longer I knew her, the more confident I was that my ministry would not be complete without her. She was gracious and willing to share my life in service to Christ and our people. To approach her parents to ask for Kindu in marriage concerned me, for I was a poor boy. The dowry that I could afford was nothing more than a little cloth and a chicken. One of the kind old ladies of the village went with me to plead my cause and present my dowry. Her parents received me graciously and called Kindu, asking if she was willing to be my wife. Kindu consented, they accepted my gift, and gave their approval. And a great celebration followed. The next few years were filled with happiness as we ministered together to our people, in their homes and in the church, and told them of the Jesus way, which meant so much to us. To add to our happiness, God gave us a little girl and then a little boy. But when our little son was born, Kindu did not recover. She grew weaker and weaker. In desperation, I sent for the missionary nurse, who came and did all she could, but she steadily grew worse. Her fever increased until she could no longer eat when our little girl would bring food to her. I knelt by her bedside in desperate earnestness to ask God to spare her life. Nevertheless, we were both resigned to the will of our Heavenly Father. I watched as her life slowly ebbed away, and soon she was gone. Friends from my village and missionaries came to share in my sorrow. Although many feared that the blow would be too much for my faith, I found that Christ was a great comfort in time of sorrow. I knew that he loved me too much to take my Kindu just to hurt me, and I loved him too much to forsake him. I had seen him help the missionaries in difficult places. Now it was my turn to experience his help and love. It was a lonely life, and many times I went to Kindu's grave and wept, but never in rebellion against the will of my Heavenly Father. I continued to pastor my church, and my people were wonderful in sustaining me with prayer. In many ways, they helped me to bear my sorrow. The fact that I bore my load gracefully was a boost to the faith of my weaker members. One of the things that added to my sorrow and loneliness was that I could not keep my 2 small children with me. 2 families in the church opened their homes to them. It was nice to see them each Sunday at church and to visit them a few minutes after the morning service, but it grew more difficult to kiss them goodbye each Sunday for another week. My loneliness grew more intense as the months passed. I began to seek divine guidance for a mother for my children and a helpmate for me in my work. About that time, someone called my attention to one of the older girls who had just graduated from the girls' school. She was a girl of unusual ability and wanted to train as a midwife, but she had already been promised to one of the wealthy chiefs, and even part of the dowry had been paid. In spite of all this, I ventured to talk to one of the women of my church and ask her to speak to Alice in my behalf. I knew that I could give only a small purchase price, while the chief could give many large gifts. But I decided to approach her parents with the hope that they would consent to our marriage. Alice had told my friend, when she had talked with her, that she would consent to be my wife, providing I would allow her to continue her training as a midwife. I felt that this would be a great asset in our ministry to our people. But the big question was whether her father would consent to returning a great dowry to the chief and accept my little gift of a few yards of cloth. We arranged a date when I would talk with her father. One of the members of my church went with me to present my dowry and plead my cause. Because the heart of Alice had been drawn to me, she too pleaded with her father to accept my gift. Her father was furious and disdained my small gift and started to beat Alice, demanding that she beg no longer. The friends who gathered around interceded for Alice and begged him to reconsider. Finally, he accepted my gift and consented to our marriage. A few months later, we were married in a neighboring church by a fellow pastor. Many of our friends gathered to share our joy. The wedding was simple, but I was sure that God had led me to this hour and place, for now my family could be reunited. A great feast was arranged by our friends after the wedding. The paramount chief gave a sheep for the occasion, and some of the men of the village were kind enough to prepare it. The women prepared great quantities of rice, soup, and other items of food. I was not able to provide such quantities of food, so this was just one of those extra good things the Lord had promised if we would serve Him. All the people of the church and village were invited. I had never realized such an expression of Christian fellowship before, and my heart was overwhelmed with gratitude. For several years, Alice and I labored diligently among our people. We were encouraged as those of our number turned from their paganism and came to our Christ. About this time, the Lord began to lay it upon the hearts of some of our missionaries to carry the gospel to a tribe known as the Susu people. As yet, there was no witness of Christ among them. One evening, the superintendent of the mission called me to his home. He told me of the desire of the missionaries to open a work in the land of the Susu people. It was a thrill for me to hear of their plans until he asked if Alice and I would be willing to go to help with the opening of this area. Immediately, thoughts came into my mind of the many wars between the tribes, between the Susu tribe and mine. I was sure that I would not be accepted in this tribe. I was told not to give an immediate answer, but to talk with Alice and pray about it. The decision was not an easy one, for the Susus had poisoned and killed many of my tribesmen. But as we prayed and discussed the matter, we were reminded of the dedication of the missionaries in bringing the Word of God to us, and of the sacrifice of Jesus in providing our redemption, and then of our own dedication to Him. In our dedication, we had promised to hold back nothing from Him, not even our own lives. Immediately, we went to tell Pa Birch. We bowed our heads in prayer as Pa Birch prayed that God would seal this decision with His divine blessing and give guidance for the plans for the future. Pastoring among a hostile tribe with a language we could not speak or understand posed serious problems. Also, they were strong Mohammedans and therefore enemies of the Christians. Soon, a trek was arranged, and we were on our way into the land of a strange people. While I was confident of God's divine leading, I could not help but fear the reaction of the Susus to a Limba tribesman coming into their country. Finally, we came to the paramount chief's town of Kanuna. This would be a logical place to open our work. The chief was a very powerful man and demanded great respect of all his subjects. Immediately, we went to his compound and made known the purpose of our visit. The chief welcomed us, but made it plain that the Jesus way was the white man's religion, and that Mohammed was their prophet. But when school for his village was proposed, his attitude changed, and he asked that we return the following day for his decision. When we returned the next day, we were given the same answer: return tomorrow. After several days, when we were about to give up in defeat, a man came to the chief and begged him to show us kindness. "These people speak good words," he said. "Don't you remember many harvests ago when a missionary came to our village? I was very sick. I met her on the path. She knew that I would die if I continued without help, so she encouraged me to go to Kamakwi, where the white doctor could make me well. Since I could no longer walk, she arranged for some men to carry me in a hammock so that I could see the doctor. The doctor was very kind to me, so different from our medicine men. He greeted me at the door and spoke words of encouragement. He put me in a clean bed, such as I had not seen before. The room was not like our mud houses. It too was white and clean. He examined my sickness and told me I was a very sick man, but he thought he could help me if I was willing to let him cut me open. This filled me with great fear, but it was my only hope. Then he cut me open and took away my sickness. I was still very sick, but he prayed to his God for me that his medicine would make me well. Soon I walked back to my village a well man." This softened the chief's heart, and he promised a better word on the next day. The following day he was friendly and pointed to a house where we could live and have services. To seal his words, he gave Pa Birch one of his fine sheep. Our hearts were made to rejoice, but we knew there were many hard experiences ahead. We requested the people of the mission and in America to share in our prayer burden for this venture. When all the arrangements were completed, we headed back on the long bush path to Kamakwi. But the trip brought new sadness to us, for one of the carriers became ill with fever and died on the journey. My own people accused the Susus of poisoning this boy, but I knew God was in this venture and did not permit such a thing to happen. Soon, we were readying ourselves for the journey to Kakuna. My boy and I journeyed alone, for my family were not to go until I could make proper arrangements for them. As we arrived to settle in Kakuna, we found our house ready and waiting, but the Mohammedan priest had warned the people not to be friendly. No one was to come near, and no one was to sell us food. In desperation, I turned to the God who had led us here. He softened the heart of a woman in the market who ventured to sell me some rice. While I received short measure and had to pay double in the current price, it was an indication that God was helping. Some months later, when I was confident that we could get a regular supply of food, I sent for my family to join me. The friends of Alice begged her not to go, but when they saw that she was determined, they walked with her down the bush path and bid her goodbye. At night, the old enemy, Satan, would tell her that the Susu people would poison her family, or that the priest would put a curse on her. But she had learned to obey Christ and to leave our family in his care. What a joy it was to have our family reunited. Soon, Alice and I realized that our task was a most difficult one. The distrust of the people and the anti-Christ attitude of the Mohammedans made progress slow among the Susus. They had spared themselves no sacrifice to build many beautiful mosques and were faithful in their services. Every holy day, great crowds of Mohammedans gathered at the mosque to say their prayers. They begged the God of Muhammad to give them peace of heart and prayed for a prophet to arise and to lead them again. Their worship was not confined to the mosque alone. When the prayer crier called the faithful to pray 5 times a day, they would spread their mats, wash their feet, and repeat the prayers of the faithful. Many would carry their prayer mats with them from place to place and would faithfully observe the prayer times even along the jungle paths or in the fields. As I watched them, I longed to be able to help them, for I too had known this darkness. But they would not come to the services or give me an opportunity to talk with them. Often I had heard the missionary say, "God works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform." And even though I believed it, I never fully realized all that statement meant. Now, in the midst of discouragement came bereavement. Our little girl died. This was a hard blow, and especially so since we were so far away from home. Because there was no one to help, it was my duty to prepare a coffin and have a little service at my own child's funeral. To our surprise, a few of our neighbors attended the simple service. This gave me an opportunity to tell them of the wonderful love of God, even in times of sorrow. Again, the tempter came to Alice and suggested that her little child had been poisoned by the Susu people or that the witch doctor had placed a curse upon her. I was sure that this was not so, and sought help from the Lord, and again we committed ourselves in renewed consecration to Him. After getting over this shock, Alice and I went into the village one afternoon to try to make friends with the people when we saw smoke arising from across the village. Soon we realized it was our house. Hurrying home, we learned that our son had accidentally set fire to our house and burned it to the ground. Because of this disaster, Alice begged to be sent back to her father. She said she could stand it no longer, but Pa Birch, hearing of our plight, hastened across country to our side to see how he could assist us, and arrived in just the nick of time. He offered comfort and financial help from the mission, and brought medicine which we could use for our family and for the rest of the people of the village. The people had observed us in sorrow and loss, and had realized that our faith was sufficient in times of trial. They soon came to trust us sufficiently to bring their sick ones to us. As I cared for them and treated them with simple medicines given to us by the mission, I told them of the Jesus way and prayed for them. More and more of the people came for medicine, and soon I could see signs of interest mixed with fear. The fact that I made no charge for the medicine impressed the people also. As soon as sores were healed, their confidence was strengthened in us and in our Christ. Out of gratitude, one mother offered me her daughter as a wife, for I had saved this girl's life with medicine. This gave me the opportunity to witness to her and tell her that when we became Christians, we only had one wife. Our prayers were being answered, and soon we saw people coming to our front veranda for services. This was a great victory, but it was months before we saw our first convert. Pa Molai, the Mohammedan who called the faithful to prayer 5 times each day, began to slip onto our veranda to listen to the message again and again. Each time I noticed a look of interest, but it was mingled with fear, as was the case with all who came. Great harm could come to them if they left the faith of their family and tribe. One day, Pa Molai came to me for medicine. It seemed that the Lord directed me to tell him that his real trouble was in his heart. God is talking to you and wants you to accept the Jesus way, I said. My heart was thrilled when he knelt to pray, and that day he took Jesus Christ into his heart and became our first convert in Susu land. The next Sunday, he eagerly received the words of my message, and as I closed the service with prayer, he arose and gave his testimony. The people were amazed and shocked, while many of them were greatly moved. Soon I noticed one man quietly slip out to report the incident to the chief and wondered just what the reaction would be. For many moons, Pa Molai had been the prayer crier of the village, and this was a serious threat to their religion. The elders of the town were greatly disturbed. Because he had entered into the Jesus way, he felt that he could no longer continue in his old job of calling the faithful Muslims to prayer. So he went to announce his decision to the priest. This infuriated the priest, who threatened him and warned the people that they were no longer allowed to assist him with his farm work. From that day on, Pa Molai worked alone. When he asked them to help him, they would refuse and walk away. Even when he would meet his neighbors on the bush path, they would refuse to speak to him. His heart was saddened by this, but he had made an eternal choice. Because of the change that had taken place in his life and activities, some of the people of the village watched him closely and then would ask him questions. Pa Molai became the first link in the chain. Soon, others turned to the Jesus way. Then we organized a church, built a school, and the influence of Christ began to spread to other villages. The seed had been sown, and the plantation was growing. Some years later, I was asked to come back to my own Limba people and serve as conference president. This brought many experiences of joy as I visited with many pastors and congregations and served the Lord in this new capacity. But other testing times were still in store for us. One day, as we were traveling to the annual conference, our baby became violently ill. We were greatly disturbed, but could do nothing but rush as fast as possible to Kamakwi and ask the doctor to care for him. After careful examination, the doctor diagnosed his sickness as polio. When told by the doctor that the child had only a very slight chance to live, I took him into my arms and asked God to please not let him suffer. In a few moments, he passed away as I held him. Missionaries, pastors, and people sympathized and bore with us in our sorrow. The next morning, we were to open the conference session, and it seemed as though God flooded our hearts with peace and joy. Had not God answered my prayer? The only recourse left was to sing the doxology for God's divine faithfulness and his benediction upon the conference. Today, my heart is challenged with a still larger twofold ministry. The years of toil have left their marks as we have labored and ministered in this blessed way. But the cords of divine love and challenge will not allow me to look back, but rather draw me on to the new challenge that is before me. As I shepherd a congregation of more than 500 people, I see my journey from darkness to light being relived in so many of my people that I cannot but reach out and proclaim this gospel of liberty to my fellow tribesmen at all cost. The change from pagan beliefs to a steadfast faith in a living Christ is as marked today as it ever has been. Because my church is located in Kamakwi, where the new mission hospital has been established, I serve as chaplain to more than 65,000 patients a year who come to be treated in the clinic. Many of these are my fellow tribesmen. Some come from as far away as the Republic of Guinea, but the love of Christ is the same for all. Hundreds of these remain as hospital patients, and here I have still greater opportunity to tell them of the Jesus way. Most of them are pagans or Mohammedans, steeped in darkness and needing the balm of Gilead far more than they need the medical help for which they have come long distances. Leprosy, yaws, sores, fevers, hydroceles, tumors, and most any other disease known to man. But all these fade into insignificance in the light of their spiritual darkness. We give thanks to God and to Christian friends around the world for these hospital buildings. But to us, they are so much more than buildings. They are institutions where the bodies and souls of Africa's real diamonds, black diamonds, yes, immortal diamonds, made to shine in Emmanuel's crown, are healed and brought into the Jesus way. A still greater joy is mine as my years of service near a close, in that even my own son is preparing to be a Christian medical doctor and help carry on this healing ministry so near to my heart. How true the words of Christ, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But for him who is willing to die, there is never a day without opportunity for fruitage. It is ours to heal the body. It is ours to train the mind. It is ours to preach the word and thus fulfill the Great Commission and lead men to the Jesus way. Africa is full of black diamonds, but Christ's death on Calvary purchased redemption and heaven for every one of us. Our search and effort for the diamonds of Africa must continue to all generations and to every tribe and to every village.